So I was just wondering if you always thought about following up with this story, or if it took the kind of Suge Knight incident recently in LA to make you want to go back and revisit.
No, I don't think I'd, I mean, it's only on a couple of other films that I've gone back. And I have to feel pretty strongly about it to do it. I think it's the third film that I have done. I did Aine Mournos, and I did one on Eugene Terre Blanche. But there were a number of reasons. One was, I felt that Russell Poole got a really hard deal, and they really victimized him. And I watched him sort of disintegrate really under the pressure that the LAPD put on him. And then he had his massive heart attack in the LA sheriff's office, and died. And then there were various programs that came out on Netflix done by another LAPD police officer, very much denigrating Russell Poole's work and coming up with an altogether different theory, which sort of surprise, exonerated the LAPD from any involvement at all. And I found that annoying, because I felt not only did it belittle Russell Poole, but it sort of belittled our intelligence. And I felt more and more determined that the LAPD weren't going to get away with a kind of snow job of just pretending they weren't involved, and anybody who thought they were was an idiot and a conspiracy theorist. And I think the other thing was that, when Suge Knight was sentenced for such a big amount of time, this, signified not only his loss of power, because I don't think that would have happened when he was in his, moment. But I think then, and before he was sentenced even, there were all those, he'd lost power, he'd lost the army of bloods that he was paying to keep him in power. And people suddenly wanted to, come forward and say things that they hadn't wanted to before. No, I just felt that there was an injustice. And it wasn't just the injustice to Biggie Smalls. It was the injustice to all the other people who had actually fought to tell the truth and had been denigrated, I felt, by the LAPD. And I was determined that their version wasn't going to be the one we were left with.
Yeah, I mean, we find out sort of the power of your last doc and how it was used as a means to kind of open the investigation. What do you, is that why you do what you do? Because documentaries have this power, don't they, to affect change? And I mean, and are you anticipating something similar here? There's some really good new evidence that's come to light in this film.
Well, I felt, I mean, I didn't realize that the investigation by Phil Carson was inspired by my first film. But we spoke to his boss, and he said, yeah, you know that your film actually caused us to set up an FBI investigation into this. And Phil Carson found Russell Poole's theories to be correct. He also came up with a lot more information. But those basic allegations that Amr Muhammad was the hitman who pulled the trigger, which, I came up with in the first film, and other claims of Russell have all been borne out in the FBI investigation. And I think that there was a lot of other evidence, like when Xavier Hermosillo, who was a judge on the fair right, on the LAPD fair rights hearing, came up with information that Bernard Parks' own daughter was friends with Mac and Perez. I mean, you couldn't write a script and have it believable. I mean, it's like, what is going on here? I mean, it's an incredible Shakespearean story. And I think all those elements, pulled me back into it. Although, it's a difficult film to make, and I wouldn't say it was, I love being with Pam. But it's not a fun film to make. Do you know what I mean? It was, I think, the first film was a lot more, I felt I had to be serious on this one and come up with substantiated facts and hopefully move it on, as you were suggesting, to a sort of vindication of the Biggie Smalls lawsuit, and the LAPD will actually have to deal with what they did.
Have you got wind yet as to whether there could be any kind of, I mean, because I imagine, I mean, the film's not kind of out there necessarily in the big bad world just yet, but it's made, people are kind of watching it, people are talking about some of the new evidence that's kind of come to light. Have you had any kind of discussions or heard any kind of whispers that there could be some sort of things that come of what we discover from this movie?
Well, not as such. I mean, I haven't been, I have Valletta Wallace, who obviously had the lawsuit, hasn't, as far as I know, seen the film yet. I mean, no one really has seen the film. One of the reasons to not show the film around before it gets released is you don't want a whole lot of lawsuits and injunctions. And this is just the kind of film that would create that sort of appetite. So I don't know. I mean, you don't, and you don't always know as a filmmaker what effect your films are going to have. I mean, I was very pleased that the FBI had looked into it, but they didn't contact me and say, thank you very much for, it's inspiring an investigation. I think all you can do is do diligent research, which you believe in, and basically share with the audience and the wider public what your beliefs are. My beliefs are that the LAPD were definitely involved, and there's been a massive cover-up by the LAPD, who have vilified everybody who was working for the truth. That's my real belief, and I hope that enough other people will be convinced of it. I mean, there's this case at the moment in Britain, a very similar case, where the Met Police Force are seen just basically, they're more concerned with their own image and how their reputation is seen than they are in having the truth come out.
Yeah. You mentioned Pam Brooks. I just wanted to ask just about how essential her help was here, and because I saw she had a producing credit as well, but it seemed like she was really pivotal in you getting the kind of access and the interviews kind of organized that you managed to get in the film.
Well, I think so. And I mean, for example, Pam was, went through rehab with Joe Cool and, Snoop's cousin. So she was right in Compton and people trust her. And so I think we were seen in a different way than if we'd just done it ourselves. And people knew that Pam knew what was going on. So they weren't sort of trying to pull the wool over our eyes. And I think we got a much more, probably, Pam got our sort of respect that we wouldn't have got otherwise,
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've probably already realized this, but today it's quite amazing to speak to you today, because it would have been Tupac's 50th birthday today. That's just a reminder, isn't it, how young they were. It's incredible to think he would only be 50 now. I mean, all this footage, and they've come, it's going back so many years, and we've seen so much kind of videos of their interviews and all that sort of stuff, but we sort of forget they were kids. I mean, they weren't kids, but they were young men, weren't they? It's incredible to know he would have only have been
with a lot of dreams that they hadn't realized, which is what makes their death such a tragedy. And Tupac, I guess in particular, was somebody who was very political, and he had a lot of dreams. And I guess the tragedy is he didn't realize them. He wanted to bring out a newspaper, and he wanted to set up these centers for political action, and he was obviously very inspired by his Black Panther roots. And it's just, very particularly, you keep wondering. I mean, I guess he's particularly a legend too with Black Lives Matter at the moment. So much of his work has been used, and he was such an outspoken and brilliant person on these issues. But it's you can't help wondering what they would have done if they'd still been around.
Yeah. My final question before I go is, I was going to ask you what you kind of got coming up next, but I know as a documentary filmmaker, is it as simple as having a next project, or have you got a kind of series of ideas and potential stories to be told and explored that you're kind of waiting for an opening for?
Well, I'm one of those people who can't sort of walk and chew at the same time. So I kind of have one thing I want to do, and that's what I go for. I'm still quite interested in doing something on the 60s, really, when I was kind of growing up. And while some of those strange bedfellows are still around, so I'm going to do something, I think, around that period of time. And I mean, I've done, very different kind of work recently. I did that film about my father. And then, before that, I did a film about Leonard Cohen, which is quite a personal film too. So one's work, it's quite interesting, I guess, as you develop or go through different phases in your life, your interest obviously changes. You're not constantly making the same film. But I feel in a much more reflective stage now than I probably was. I think, when I made the original Biggie and Tupac film, I was kind of making films in a different way. And I was kind of angry at all the obstacles that I was encountering, partly stylistically. And so obviously I don't have that kind of anger anymore. I mean, the style that I was developing there is kind of mainstream now, so it's just a different thing, different emotional approach.
Yeah, well, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Nick. I mean, that first film about Biggie and Tupac meant so much to me when I saw it. I was about 14, I think, when I saw it. Yeah, and everyone at school it was like all we could talk about at school for like a week or two. It was
right. That makes me very happy. Yeah.
I think this is a brilliant follow-up, if you can call it that. But thank you so much for your time anyway.
Thank you.
Best of luck with the release. Cheers.
I'll call it that. All right.
Cheers. Take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys.
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey, you guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yes.
Nice.